My family skipped my biggest moment, but when my $185 million valuation hit Forbes, Dad texted, "Family dinner at 7 p.m. Important discussion." I showed up looking like I had nothing, driving a rusted-out 2010 sedan with a mismatched bumper and a screeching fan belt, the kind of car that screamed financial desperation in this neighborhood. They thought they were going to manipulate their invisible daughter into handing over a fortune to save their sinking ship. They smiled. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I'd love to know who is part of our community today. I stared at the glowing phone screen in my silent office, the blue light reflecting off the dark mahogany desk. For 8 full months, my existence had been a non-event to the Miller family. No check-ins, no quick texts, just a digital graveyard of silence, while they focused on their own carefully curated lives. Now, this sudden summons arrived. I didn't feel a rush of warmth or a spark of hope. I only felt the familiar, biting chill of the night the strings finally snapped the night of the awards. It was exactly 2 years ago, the night of the Global FinTech Innovation Gala. I was 30 years old and about to be named the top mind in cybersecurity. I wanted to believe that if I just reached a certain height, the gravity of their indifference would finally break. I booked a private room at the Obsidian, the kind of place where the silence is as expensive as the vintage wine. I had spent an hour in front of my mirror, adjusting a navy silk dress, trying to look like the success they always ignored. I wanted them to walk into that room and finally see me, Madison, the daughter who had built an empire without their help. I had pre-ordered a massive seafood tower because I knew it was my mother's favorite. I sat there at 7 p.m., the only person at a table set for 5. At 7:30, the ice in my water glass had melted. I texted my older brother, Tyler, who sent back a half-baked lie about a flat tire. My mother, Jennifer, didn't reply for 10 agonizing minutes before claiming a blinding migraine that had her confined to her bed. I should not have checked social media, but my gut knew better. I opened Instagram and saw a video posted 5 minutes ago from a rooftop bar downtown. There was my mother, Jennifer, wearing a sparkling cocktail dress and holding a martini, laughing, as if the word migraine was a foreign concept. They were all there. Jackson, my younger brother and the family's golden child, was having a launch party for his new luxury lifestyle brand. They had all chosen a fake party for a jobless 25-year-old over the biggest milestone of my career. People ask why I stayed so long, why I kept paying the emotional subscription for a family that had overdrafted my compassion for years. Looking back, I realized I was in a prison without bars. It is a psychological state called learned helplessness. When you are conditioned from birth to believe your value is only found in their approval, you become a survivor with invisible chains. I was not being sensible or loyal back then. I was an inmate, waiting for a jailer who had already tossed the key into the sea. I sat in that beautiful room for another hour as the seafood tower melted into a lukewarm pool of gray water. That was the last thing I ever bought for them out of hope. I paid the $400 bill for an empty table and walked out into a freezing Chicago rain. I stood under a street lamp and let the water soak through my dress, the hot tears mixing with the cold rain until I could not tell the difference. That was the night I realized I was the silent investor in a bankruptcy of the heart. This was not revenge. This was accounting. The heavy oak doors of the private VIP room swung open, and I stepped into a world of rich cherry wood paneling and massive crystal chandeliers. It was a theatrical stage, set for a performance I had already seen 1,000 times. Every single one of them was there, waiting, like actors who had been told the lead was finally arriving. My father, Michael, sat at the head of the table in his signature navy pinstripe power suit, his heavy gold watch gleaming sharply under the lights. My mother, Jennifer, sat to his right wearing a designer dress that glittered sharply, her eyes already scanning me for weaknesses. The second my scuffed shoes touched the thick carpet, the shrieking began. There she is! Jennifer practically shrieked, a high-pitched, incredibly fake sound that scraped against my nerves. She rushed across the room toward me, throwing her arms around my neck in a hug that was tight, suffocating, and entirely performative. She smelled strongly of hairspray and gin, a suffocating mix that represented the Miller brand. "We missed you so much, Maddie," she cooed, pulling back and holding me by the shoulders. She had not used that nickname since I was 10. I did not wrap my arms around her, I just let them hang limply at my sides. This was not a reunion. It was a trade show. Tyler, my older brother, smirked from his chair, looking me up and down with open disdain. He had dark circles under his eyes and smelled of cheap cologne despite his expensive suit. "Nice sweater, Maddie," Tyler smirked, his eyes dropping to the frayed thread on my sleeve. "Did you pick that up at a thrift store on the way here?" Jennifer scolded him with a cruel little smile playing on her lips, telling him I was just being thrifty. Michael stood up, his massive frame dominating the space, and thrust his hand out. He loved to squeeze your hand until the bones ground together, his pathetic way of establishing dominance. I took his hand, and I did not flinch. I locked my grip just a fraction harder than his. I saw a flicker of genuine surprise flash across his eyes for a split second before he masked it with a booming, hollow laugh. They poured the champagne greedily, but I did not let a single drop pass my teeth. Jackson, our influencer brother, barely lifted his eyes from his phone screen. I saw the Forbes article. Jackson finally spoke up. 185 million. That is absolutely insane. It is a company valuation, Jackson. However, I recently completed a secondary share sale to a private equity firm. I have the liquidity, and I knew exactly where I wanted to spend it. Michael waved his large hand dismissively. Still, it is incredibly impressive. Who would have ever thought our quiet Madison would be running a massive tech empire? The appetizers arrived, massive plates of shrimp cocktail and fresh oysters, a ridiculous display of wealth they could no longer afford. Michael finally hoisted a heavy black leather briefcase onto the table with a loud thud. He undid the latches and slid a thick, glossy presentation folder toward me. The cover featured a futuristic building made of glass and cedar wood. "The Miller Resort and Spa, a new era," it read, in gold foil. Michael began his rehearsed speech about legacy and the evolving market. "We are going to bulldoze the old motel chain, Madison. We are going to build a 5-star luxury wellness retreat." Jennifer chimed in, her eyes wide and shining with greed, claiming she was personally designing the meditation gardens. "It is a guaranteed slam dunk," Tyler added aggressively. I looked at the $18 million build projections. Michael took a slow sip of water, his eyes tracking my expression like a starving wolf. "We have the primary institutional investors lined up," Michael lied without a flinch. "But banks are slow. Before they release the funds, they want to see a bridge loan injected up front. We realize we should not be paying high interest to strangers. We should keep the wealth inside the family." He locked eyes with me, his face radiating false confidence. "We want to offer you the exclusive chance to be a primary partner. We need a bridge loan of $3 million. The room went completely, terrifyingly silent. They were not looking for a daughter, they were looking for a bank account. $3 million, I repeated slowly, letting the number vibrate against the expensive crystal glassware. Michael leaned forward, his face a mask of patronizing expectation. I reached into my worn messenger bag, but I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a thin, sleek gray tablet and hit the power button. The screen glowed a cold, clinical blue in the dim lighting of the gold room. "That is very funny, Dad," I said, tapping the glass screen, "because I like to do a little routine due diligence before I attend business meetings. Public financial records are fascinating things to read." I watched Michael's arrogant smile falter just a fraction of an inch. A tiny bead of sweat appeared near his hairline. "What exactly do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice suddenly losing its booming resonance. "Well," I said, scrolling down the digital document so they could all see the official county seals. According to the county clerk's office, First National Bank did not approve a construction loan for any resort. I looked up, locking my eyes onto his. "Actually, First National filed a formal notice of default against your properties exactly 3 months ago." The silence that slammed into the room was the suffocating silence of a live grenade that had just been dropped onto the center of the table. "That is a massive misunderstanding," Michael stammered, the color draining rapidly from his face. I did not stop. "An occupancy is not a seasonal dip, Tyler," I said, looking at my older brother. "According to the state tax filings, your occupancy has been hovering under 40% for 2 consecutive years." I tapped the screen harder. You are not pivoting because you have a grand vision, Dad. You are pivoting because you are bleeding cash from every artery. I pushed the tablet toward the center of the table. You do not need $3 million for a bridge loan. You need $3 million to stop First National from seizing the commercial property on the 1st of next month. You are entirely insolvent. Jennifer gasped loudly, pressing her hand over her mouth. Madison, how dare you use that word in this room, she shrilled. It is the mathematical truth, Mom, I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. The business is a sinking ship, and you invited me here to pay for your lifeboats. Tyler slammed his hand on the table, knocking over his water glass. You do not understand the market. You just stare at computer screens all day. Is it standard hospitality operation to borrow from predatory hard money lenders at 18% interest? I fired back. I watched Tyler's face turn ghost white. You took a massive second mortgage from a shady group out of Chicago 3 years ago, I said, scrolling to the disbursement section. And you did not use that equity to renovate. You stripped it out to fund executive bonuses. You used it to pay for Tyler's brand new Porsche and Jackson's luxury lifestyle instead of saving the company. I looked at Jennifer's wrist, which was adorned with glittering diamonds. You used it to buy jewelry. We earned those bonuses, Jennifer cried out indignantly, her voice shrill with panic. Do you expect us to live like absolute peasants? I expect you to pay your legally binding debts, I stated simply. The facade was completely gone now. The polite, loving family act had shattered into a million jagged pieces. Michael slammed both of his massive fists onto the table, the silverware clattering loudly against the china plates, in a way that sounded like a death knell. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple, and the veins in his neck were bulging against his silk collar. Who the hell do you think you are, coming into my club investigating your own flesh and blood? He roared. The fake warmth was entirely replaced by pure toxic rage. We raised you! We put a roof over your head! You owe us! I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly. I did not feel sadness or a need to apologize. I felt like a giant looking down at a cornered rat. My voice was rock solid. I owe you absolutely nothing, I said. You ignored my existence for 8 months. You missed my award ceremony. You missed every milestone of my life. But the absolute second you saw a $sign printed next to my name in a magazine, you suddenly remembered you had a middle daughter. Tyler snarled, pushing his chair back violently and lunging forward as if he were ready to swing at me right across the table. Sit down, Tyler, I commanded sharply. The authority in my voice was so absolute that he physically flinched. He stopped dead in his tracks and slowly sank back into his chair, looking shocked by his own obedience. I am not done, I said, sweeping my gaze across all of them. I turned my attention to the final document on my tablet. Jennifer was frantically dabbing her eyes, wailing about how family is supposed to stick together. This is not just about bad management or a sinking ship, Dad, I said, my tone shifting to something even more clinical and lethal. This is about the criminal twist you have been hiding from Mom. Michael's eyes darted toward Jennifer as I pulled up the pension fund collateral agreement. You told the bridge lenders that the $3 million loan would be secured by Jennifer's private pension fund, I explained coldly. Jennifer stopped whimpering, her mouth falling open as she looked at her husband. What is she talking about, Michael? She whispered. I scrolled to the signature line and zoomed in. Except Jennifer did not sign this, did she? I had a forensic expert and a private investigator review this. I already have a sworn affidavit from the notary who witnessed the fraud, Michael. It is a clumsy forgery. You stole Jennifer's entire retirement fund to pledge it against a resort that is already in default. The room went entirely quiet again, but this time it was the suffocating silence of an empire collapsing from the inside. Jennifer let out a sound that was not a sob. It was a scream of pure betrayal. She turned on Michael, her hands clawing at his expensive pinstripe suit as she demanded to know how he could do this to her. The family alliance was gone, shattered by a forged signature and a stolen future. This is not business anymore, Michael, I said, watching the man who had controlled me for 30 years look like an empty suit. This is a crime. I reached up and tapped the small Bluetooth earpiece hidden in my left ear. Elena, I said clearly, it's time. The heavy double doors of the gold room swung open with a solid thud. My chief financial officer, Elena, walked into the room wearing a razor-sharp gray suit. She carried a thick, heavy stack of legal documents and walked directly to my side, stepping into the space between me and my father. She did not offer a polite smile. She looked like a highly paid executioner arriving to finish a job. Michael stared at Elena, then down at the documents. The deep purple color in his face was rapidly draining away, replaced by a sickly, pale gray. I rested my hand flat on top of the stack of papers. The top folder was a stark, heavy blue, with the official seal of the state court pressed into the thick paper. "I did not come here tonight to give you a loan, Michael," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I do not lend my capital to failing, mismanaged businesses. It is a terrible investment strategy." "Then why the hell are you still standing here?" Jennifer cried out, her voice trembling as she clutched her diamond necklace. I looked directly into Michael's eyes, wanting to see the exact moment his world collapsed. "I am here to make a purchase," I said. The room went entirely quiet again, the sound of 6 people holding their breath. Michael looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of his own massive financial failures. "I knew about your catastrophic financial trouble exactly 3 weeks ago," I continued, ignoring Tyler and speaking only to my father. "My market intelligence team saw the default notices. You were bleeding out in public. I did not come here to save you. I came here to foreclose on you." Michael gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles turned pure white. "You can't," he whispered. "You don't own the commercial debt." "Actually," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed louder than a shout, "I do." I tossed the blue folder across the table until it stopped perfectly in front of his empty dinner plate. "I purchased your entire debt portfolio from the Chicago Private Equity Group yesterday morning," I explained calmly. "Since you defaulted on the loan payments last quarter, the transfer of voting rights clause was triggered. I didn't just buy your debt. Dad, I exercised the right to replace the entire board of directors. As of this morning, I am the sole decision maker for Miller Holdings." Michael stared blindly at the paper. "And First National?" he asked slowly. "I didn't call the main headquarters. I contacted the board of that small community bank you've been bleeding dry. They were more than happy to offload your toxic assets to my holding company before the regulators stepped in. Alina finalized the wire transfer while you were all eating your shrimp cocktails. I own the primary mortgage on the resort, the secondary lien on the lake house, and the corporate debt on the family vehicles. I am your primary creditor. I am the bank. Michael, what you have to realize is that your entire position was built on the illusion of wealth in an empty wallet. You spent your life confusing having with being. You thought your expensive suit and your country club membership gave you authority, but that authority was only a temporary rental. Without my money, the man you pretended to be simply does not exist. So when you tell me to get out, Michael, you might want to be careful. Technically speaking, you are currently sitting in a chair that I paid for. I am not a cruel person, Michael, I said, my voice low and steady, carrying through the suffocating silence. I am not you. Because I actually understand how a balance sheet works, I am offering you a clean exit. I reached out and slowly flipped a single piece of paper Elena had placed on the table. It was a certified cashier's check made out for $500,000. Michael stared at the numbers as if they were written in a dead language. 500,000? He repeated, his voice a pathetic shadow of its former self. The land alone has to be worth more than that. The land is leveraged to the hilt, Michael. I cut him off, my tone as clinical as a surgical strike. You own absolutely nothing. You are underwater. This check is a gift, the very last gift I will ever give you. I looked directly at Tyler, whose face was a map of suppressed rage and growing panic. And speaking of company assets, you need to hand over the Porsche keys right now. Tyler's head snapped up, his skin turning a sickly shade of pale. What? No, I need my car. The Porsche is a registered company vehicle, I stated flatly. The company now belongs entirely to me, and it is against my corporate policy to allow terminated employees to drive company assets. Furthermore, I have already removed you from the corporate insurance policy as of 10 minutes ago. If you drive that car out of this lot, you are driving uninsured, and I will report the vehicle as stolen to the police immediately. Keys. Now, Tyler cursed under his breath, a string of foul words that meant nothing to me anymore, and slammed the silver key fob into Elena's open palm. And for the house, I said, turning my gaze toward Jennifer, who was clutching her chest as if she'd been shot. Jennifer, while that forged signature gives you grounds to contest the mortgage, it also gives me the evidence to put Michael in federal prison for bank fraud. I have the notary's affidavit. If you sign this voluntary surrender of the property right now, I will keep the authorities out of it and you can take that $500,000 check. You'll have 30 days to vacate. If you fight me, I'll hand this file to the district attorney before the sun goes down. Sign or he goes to jail. What will it be? I suggested she use her portion of the severance to find a modest rental in the suburbs. Jennifer let out a high-pitched whimper. A rental? What will the girls at the club think? Try telling them the truth for the first time in your life, I said, feeling a strange, profound sense of calm. Tell them you spent decades pretending to be rich while neglecting the very person who could have actually saved you. You might think this is just about settling a debt, but this is the justice of the sower. I am taking the profits from this acquisition and establishing a foundation to support women who are trying to break into the tech and cybersecurity industries. While you were busy trying to destroy my spirit to protect a fake legacy, I was building a real one. This is not about your destruction, it is about my construction. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy double doors of the gold room. My footsteps felt incredibly light. Michael's voice called out behind me, weak and cracking. Maddie, wait! We did love you in our own way. I stopped, my hand on the cool brass handle, but I did not turn around. No, Michael, I said softly to the door. You loved having a daughter you could safely ignore until she suddenly became useful to your bank account. That is not love. That is ownership. And I am not for sale anymore. I walked out into the crisp Chicago night, the air tasting like absolute freedom. I found my old Subaru in the parking lot and sat in the quiet cabin for a moment. I pulled out my phone and performed a clean, clinical digital surgery. Michael Miller, blocked. Jennifer Miller, blocked. Tyler, Jackson, all of them. I watched their names vanish from my active life one by one. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and drove away from the arrogant lights of the club. For the first time in 30 years, I was driving my own car on my own road, and I was finally home. Looking back at the lights of the city fading in my rearview mirror, I realized something profound about the word family. For 30 years, I treated my bloodline like a holy contract. I was forced to sign at birth. I thought that because we shared a name, I owed them my silence, my loyalty, and eventually every bit of my success. But I have come to realize that family is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for abuse or neglect. Just because someone gave you life does not mean they have the right to drain it from you, $1 or one insult at a time. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like the invisible one in your own home, please hear me. Your worth was never their decision to make. People like Michael and Jennifer do not see children. They see assets or inconveniences. They ignored me when I was a struggling student because I was not useful to their brand. They only saw me when the number 185 million appeared next to my name. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that you do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Most people think revenge is about a loud explosion or a public downfall. But I have learned that the sweetest revenge is much quieter than that. It is the moment you wake up and realize their presence or their absence no longer has any market value in your soul. It is when you stop performing for an audience that was never going to clap for you anyway. My real inheritance was not the properties I seized or the debt I bought. It was the silence. The wonderful, heavy silence of a life where I am finally the only one holding the pen. Forgiveness is not always about the other person. Sometimes it is just the final accounting entry you make to close a bad account forever. I chose to build a legacy on integrity and empowerment instead of entitlement and lies. I started that foundation not to spite them, but to ensure that other women do not have to wait 30 years to realize they are already enough. You are the architect of your own story, and you get to decide who stays in the building. If the journey of Madison has empowered you to draw your own boundaries with toxic people, please leave the letter W for winner in the comments below. It lets me know who in this community is ready to stop being a footnote and start being the author. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember, you do not need an invitation to shine. I will see you in the next story.